Hey y'all, it's Dwight. This is hour 2 of the Opioid Overdose Awareness broadcast that happened on August 31st. In this hour 2, there's several people that called in. Dylan Schlender of the Reels of Justice podcast, and yours truly, going on and on. Enjoy hour 2. Yeah, you know what? It is very interesting to get into the element that was brought up, which is the social community, the sense of sociality and community that exists, and the impact that that often has. In fact, I'm going to have a video that I want to share with everybody. Well, you know, I'm gonna. And it is Johann Hari. It's actually from a TED Talk. I'm going to go ahead and pull that up now. Oops, there we go. Let's make sure. And all right, we're going to go ahead and, wait a second. Wait a second. Before we do that, oh my gosh. What we're going to do actually is we're going to share another charity. The alarm went off a couple minutes before Vern left. And so I'm going to hit up another charity and then we'll go to that talk. The charity that I want to, and I'll say I'm not 100% sure this is not for profit. I know Kenneth who runs it, but it is free treatment. So I'm going to put it up there. I think that he does have it as a nonprofit. The only income that they make is if you buy his book, Better is Better, or I think he has another book on there too. So HAMS, harm reduction for alcohol. I'm going to get into a little later what harm reduction means, but they have a Facebook group, and they also have hams.cc is the website. I'll give you here in a second. A peer-led, free of charge support and informational group for anyone who wants to change their drinking habits for the better. And as is part of the harm reduction mindset, Kenneth has developed some tools to use if you want to stop drinking. That's great. And if you aren't ready to do that, or if you just don't want to do that, but you need to control your drinking and things, and get into a better, more healthy framework, but abstinence from alcohol is not your goal, then this is actually a really good place to go. You won't be shamed for that. And you know, there is a lot of discussion. I will say in the Facebook group, which I'm a member of as well, there's a lot of open discussion there about different strategies that people have to control their drinking and to control their drug use. And they talk openly about some of the experiences, positive and otherwise, that they've had with 12-step communities as well. And so it's a safe place to do that, because sometimes if you come into treatment and you tell somebody, you know, I'm just not sure that I'm ready to stop drinking or to stop using drugs right now, or maybe I don't know if I even want to. Hopefully they'll talk to you about it, but they don't always. Sometimes people are like, oh, well, then you're in denial. You're not ready yet. So what do we do with that? So I'm going to, let's pull up this TED Talk by Johanny. Yeah, so this is a TED Talk by Johann Hari, and he's going to talk about some of the issues with addiction and research and things like that. I may pause and pop in, or I may let it run for a bit. I'm gonna maximize it. I thought I'm gonna go ahead and maximize it so you can see it, rather than everybody notice that trend in like TikToks and Reels where somebody just posts someone else's content and half the screen is them being like, So I'm not going to do that. If you love that, then whatever. All right, here we go.
One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's now exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer, because we believed that would deter them. It would give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love and trying to figure out if there was some way to help them. And I realized there were loads of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to. Like, what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read loads of stuff about it, and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who lived this and studied this and talk to them and see if I can learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start, but I ended up going and meeting loads of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Brownsville, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spends a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongooses to see if they like them. It turns out they do, but only in very specific circumstances. To the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, what I thought I know, right? Let's think about this middle row here, right? Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little bit more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks. You'd start to physically need them. And at the end of
We got a little pause there in the thing. Not sure if that's going to unpause, some kind of freezing up dealy. We'll see what happens there. It's actually a good moment for a pause, however. Let me go ahead and add a little bit. One of the points that he's making is that not everybody has the same route of addiction or the same process of addiction, right? And so there's something very interesting in that. And I will say that some of the ways, this is Johan Hari, by the way, I put up his website because he does share his thoughts and his writings, for a living. So since I'm able to use some of his free material here, I thought I'd plug him. I don't know anything about his other work. He's a journalist and he does seem to study things. Now, one thing he's going to say here, if he comes back from free internet freezing, is that if you did heroin all this much, if you drank all this much, the audience probably wouldn't become homeless, probably wouldn't become. That's kind of a bold statement. I'm not sure kind of where he gets that from, but I think the underlying point that he's making, I would agree with, which is he's trying to say, not everybody has the same experience with addiction, the same experience and route with addiction. So we'll see if we can get the thing back here. So we'll mess with that a little bit, and I may just have to relate to you what he says.
Imagine all of you for 20 experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been took it for a while. Your body would become dependent on those hooks. You'd start to physically need them. And at the end
of Anyway, all right. Well, it's fine if it doesn't want to cooperate with us.
Actually, very little of it is heroin. Whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure. And you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are loads of people in this room who may not realize that you've taken quite a lot of heroin, right?
There we go. Whatever. So the point that he brings up in this, and he gets into some of the research that's been done, particularly with rats, which is very interesting. Which is a very interesting process. So he gets into some of the research that's been done with rats, and this is true. This is yes, thank you, Vern, for the point. The internet had too much to drink. Yeah, the internet is beginning to go into the nod or going into the drunken stupor. So I appreciate the support there. The thing that they've done to rats, and by the way, if you ever want to judge humanity by the way we've treated rats, it's not good. It doesn't look so good for us as humans. But the rats sometimes in these experiments are fed water. Some rats are fed normal water. Some rats are fed water that is laced with drugs. And oftentimes they have both of these waters available to them. And what happens is they drink the drug-laced water so much that they will die. Okay, that what happens is that they'll neglect all of the other needs that they have to the point where they will die. Okay, and so let's bring that up. There we go. And so what happens, though, is that they also create this kind of like wonderful city or playground for rats where you're going to have a lot of rats that are have a lot of opportunities for social things. Rats are very social creatures. And so they put this thing together. It's this little like fun zone / city for rats to be socially healthy and mentally healthy. And they give them all the things of a community, although they know there's plenty of food, there's plenty of companionship and things like that they're able to have. And they find that when they make the drug-induced water available, they make them available for rats. They don't drink as much when they're in that community, which is a really interesting thing to see. Yes, Dylan, thank you. No love for rats. Take them all for science. Let's get that debate going. If anybody's a rat lover out there, then come on, we'll go at it. We'll get you and Dylan on here. So with this, this has been touted as and it is a pivotal piece of research. Now, rats are not humans, but from some of the real life kind of situations that we have had, where we can observe the way that humans, I should say, the way that humans behave, is that we do find that this tends to bear out. Okay, what happens is that when you have good sociality, good community, good sense of that, as Vern was saying earlier, you tend to use less drugs. You tend to stay away from that and have less risk factors, is the way that I'm going to say that. There is a danger in that research as well, because when we do research and then we apply it to humans directly out of the gate from animal tests, there's a lot of complexity to human beings that cannot be mirrored in that. And you absolutely cannot do the same experiment on humans. At least you shouldn't. By the way, I think that's what the show Severance is about. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't know. But that you can't do a complete laboratory assignment on the entire lifespan of a human and socialize them or not socialize them and all that jazz. So therefore, we don't know that for sure. And we certainly have a lot of people with addictions, behavioral addictions, as well as drug addictions and alcohol addictions, who actually seem to have good relationships and also come from good communities. Now, there's a whole host of things that get in the way there. And so I think we always have to be a little careful with that kind of research. We assume, and once again, we sometimes do the wrong thing, which is we prescriptively weaponize this principle and we throw it at people and say, well, if you were hanging out more, well, if you're pushing yourself to be social, well, instead of looking at the community, which once again, we can also blame the community and say, why aren't you doing more for people? Why aren't you doing more to help people have a sense of community? Do we do that? Do we have to do that? Should we do that? No, probably not when it comes to the individual and society thing. Sure, to a point, but do we just blame it? Do we just say that's the one thing and then we don't do anything else? Because that's not good. That's not helpful. That's not problem solving. And I think that sometimes this becomes something we can hide behind or we can throw at other people. So it is true that a good sense of sociality and community, if you can foster that in your family or your community, if you can engage in it yourself, risk factors for overdose, risk factors for drug abuse is much less. That is true. However, we also need to be aware of the way that people work. And there's a lot of things in life that if we look at them in a healthy way, and I'm going to try to be healthy as I usually try to be anyway. If we look at them, everything, they're on a scale. And so this is a scale. It's a pretty elaborate scientific tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to attach this to the scale. And you can, of course, read that because of my great handwriting skills. Attachment. We all are born with a certain sense of attachment. Attachment is very important for all health problems that we go through. And, oh, hey, Carly. Welcome, Carly. Carly gave us a heart and commented on my wonderful scale. And yeah, we got Dylan here as well, coming back around. These graphics are out of this world. It's totally true. You know, Carly, by the way, the heads up the Core Temp Arts podcast, which my podcast is a part of, and is a wonderful contributor and artist as well as experienced in nonprofit. So really grateful to have you here as well, Carly. Thank you. So if you're to look at this, attachment is the sense. And if you want to learn more about attachment, go back and research John Bowlby, B-O-W, just like a bowl, B-Y, like bye. Say bye to your bowls. I don't know. That doesn't work. But it works when it comes to research. You're welcome. And John Bowlby did a lot of research on kids and what he called attachment. And I don't remember if he named it or not, but the idea being that we all have an ability to attach to people around us. Okay. That we all have some ability to attach to our parents. Now, do we have a high amount of attachment? You guys get it, right? Do we have a high amount of ability to attach in a healthy way? And that gets into a lot of our own stages of development and the way that we feel towards the world around us and towards maybe our parents are usually the first people we meet, our family. Do I feel a true sense of autonomy, development? Am I open to that? And am I able to attach successfully? Or am I what they call an insecure attacher? In other words, the strength of my attachments is in doubt. In an extreme case, this gets into diagnoses, what they call reactive attachment disorder, okay, is when people have an extreme, usually because of neglect or abuse, they have extreme distancing from their ability to attach. Now, am I at higher risk if I don't attach? Well, let's combine this with that research and that observational experience that we have about community and attachment to a community being a huge reduction in our risk factors for addiction. Right. And if I can't attach, I can't attach. And if I am not attaching, then I'm not having the benefits. Even if I'm in a great family, even if I'm in a great community, then we don't know what's going on internally inside of people. Okay. So just provision of the community itself, it's kind of like if you were to put food out, you know, if you were to put a big platter of food out and say, hey, everybody should come eat this, but you don't necessarily check and see if anybody has transportation to get to your house, or if or you don't necessarily go and market it very much, or you don't necessarily see, you know, who has food allergies and what, and you get it basically, you know. So we have to look at the individual as well. This is where access to things like mental health care, as well as things that prevent child abuse, as well as things that can increase, you know, treatment, proper medical treatments for things that can interfere with attachment. And also, is where just talking to people comes in, by the way, right? Are we in a relationship with people to where we can be open, to where we can share, and to where we really know where they're coming from, right? And if we are, we tend to attach better. We tend to at least notice when we're not attaching. And of course, there's a whole host of things that can get in the way of sociality and the ability to be social and connect. Social anxiety, ADHD sometimes, autism and autism spectrum disorders, often underdiagnosed, especially in females. And those type of things can get in the way. My own diagnosis with ADHD and with bipolar disorder is like one that's very easy to alienate people. And especially if I've made bad choices because of it, or if I am freaking out a lot because of it, I can alienate people, and then they're not as much part of my life, right? And do they understand, and do I understand why that is, that those things happen? So a bunch of things that have to do with connection is very, very, very important. We are, coming up on it. I'm going to do it because we're just a minute away from our next charity check. Checking our charities. We're going to go ahead and do that now. Whoop. Thank you, Vern. I got a jet, learned a lot from the event. Thank you for having me on, Dwight. I really appreciate it, Vern. Appreciate you being here. It's a great thing to have you on. Great thing to have everybody on who's joining. Where are we? Charity list. Great. I'm bringing up a charity right now. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's called the Rosencrantz Foundation. They're a very interesting charity that we're going to have, you might be interested to learn about. They help to fund not only research, but also treatment. They have things that I guess you could call them treatment scholarships in a way. Once again, this one scored a 10 out of 10 on the thing that I looked up about it. So let me bring that up so you can see it a little bit better. rosencrantz.org/foundation. And they work, like I said, very frequently with addiction. Obviously, that's their thing, is addiction. I'm vamping while I'm bringing up their website while I'm typing. There we go. So apologies for the vamp there, for the vamping. So what they do is they help people to do better treatment. They fund research into treatment. They try to fund treatment as well, making funds available for direct care and for people who cannot necessarily afford it. So when you give donations here, what you're doing is you're donating towards families, individuals, children, and things that are people and things that can help. So here's a couple. They can do charity care. They have special programs for veterans, first responders, and different special projects. So that's another nonprofit organization that you can help out with. That is a good one, as far as I can tell. I've never, dealt with them myself, but so there you go. And let me remember to hit the timer. We should have another one of those in 20 minutes as well. Okay. So where do we want to go into next? Let's look at one of the things that's very interesting about the history of problems with addiction is that there is an organ at failure. Okay. There's an organ at failure in every medical problem. That's actually the medical model, is you look for what organ is at failure. If someone has a broken bone is an organ. So we find that, we stabilize it, patch it up, whatever, cast it, I think, with a cast, different things you can do for that. If someone had a heart attack, well, the organ at failure is the heart. And there's studies about how the heart works. Very mechanical. It's like pumping blood and oxygenating blood is my understanding through all the chambers and such. So that's very good. That's important. You want that to be working. One of the things that's a problem with addiction, one of the many things that is very tricky about the treatment, is that for a long time it was almost impossible to figure out what is the organ at failure. It took a while to figure out that the organ at failure, the organ that's being damaged, is the brain, that we're having a lot of problems with the brain. And when we have a lot of problems with the brain, one of the things that's very tricky about that is that the brain is hard to study. It isn't just, it is mechanical. It does have things that happen in it that make thoughts happen, but there's many of them are unobservable, and many of them are difficult to observe. Many of them are just theoretical because they're at such a small, scale, and they're just billions and billions of things going on. So that can be very tricky. And so when medical science was unable to study the brain in such a way that they could identify the organ at failure and stabilize it, well, one of the things that happened is it just became kind of like, meh, what do we do with this? And historically the medical community has not known what to do with it up until the last, say 10, 15, 20 years. There's been huge advances in that. And so therefore, what do we do with odd behaviors when we don't know what to do with the people who are doing the odd behaviors? Well, we police them, don't we? It became the realm of law enforcement and crisis intervention. People who come and say, hey, there's something going on. Now, if you're in real distress, physiological distress, you're going to overdose, things like that. Of course, medicine would be involved, but then oftentimes you would be charged with a crime. I had a coworker, he's passed away, but he was in the Vietnam War and became addicted to substances. He later on was able to overcome the addictive parts and those kinds of symptoms. After he overcame that, he became a substance abuse counselor. He became a mental health professional counselor as well. Anyway, but one of the things that he told me once is that when he came back from Vietnam, and in Vietnam, there's a tremendous amount of heroin use, a lot that was there. And he had already had some experiences with drugs. He got to Vietnam and had a tremendous amount of experiences, came back to the United States, knew there was a problem, went to his commanding officer, said, I need help, and was jailed, essentially. Spent time in the criminal justice system because of it, and said, yep, let's help you into a pair of handcuffs and get you. Now, I will say since then, my understanding and my experience with the military treatment is that it's a little more progressive than that now. Thank goodness. But that was the treatment that he received, was go to jail, right? Because you have a moral defect. You should be locked up until you get over it and stop infecting everyone with this weird behavior that you're doing by having this addiction problem. So that became the realm of law enforcement. It became the realm of basically reward and punishment, and those kinds of things alone have not impacted the problem and did not help. And so then you get people with a more medical mindset or a more charitable social work kind of mindset that come in. AA was developed and things like that happen to be more supportive and try to understand the problem a little bit better. But when medical science started to catch up, there's been some tremendous research that's been done that kind of helps us to understand more of what we're dealing with when we're in there. Well, maybe I should do another awesome graphic here. If you look at it, I'm going to draw a brain. Here we are on the broken brain. I'm drawing a brain. There you go. That's a brain. So this bit here is supposed to be the frontal cortex. This is terrible writing. In Zoom, you have a whiteboard. I haven't found one in StreamYard yet. It probably exists. Someone's going to at me and say, hey, dummy, here's how you do that. So the frontal cortex is probably a little big for the frontal cortex, but then again, that brain seems to be quite abnormal. Abnormal, I think, is the name of the person who has that brain. So right behind here, you got the frontal cortex. We make a lot of decisions. We make all our, executive functioning and decisions with the frontal cortex. And because of that, we think that that's what's involved. We think that type of reasoning and that part of our personality, even if we don't know that it comes from the frontal cortex, we tend to think, well, that part of our personality is what is at failure when there is an addiction, right? And that we're making bad decisions. Well, what they found is it's actually interesting because, let me change colors of marker because it's always more dramatic to have a different color, is that in a lower, more back of the brain area is what you call the limbic system. And the limbic system is what is in charge of our survival mechanisms. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn or friend are some of the responses that we have when we are confronted with trauma or crisis. And also in there is the innate pleasure kind of a system. And we're going to find here, actually locate, there's some information that I have that I want to try to share with you about that as well. So hang on one second. So you know what? I'm going to try again. This one's a YouTube video I'm going to share from Dr. Kevin McCulley. Kevin McCulley is actually local to my area. He has become quite well known on the training kind of circuit when it comes to addiction. He's kind of well known as a person who's a surgeon and also a jet pilot in the Air Force. So he's a pretty, cool guy with all these things. And then after that had some problems with addiction, with drug and alcohol addiction, self-prescription, got into some legal issues. This is all public. This is all the story that he's very open about this, by the way. And I don't know him personally, but this is where his trainings are based on. And then he got into regaining his medical license, becoming a researcher, and then he is a specialist now in treatment of addiction. And so let's see what if we can share a little bit here about what he's going through.
The theory that describes what goes wrong in the frontal cortex during addiction was developed by Dr. Peter Kalavas at the Medical University of South Carolina and Dr. Nora Volkoff, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. They recognize that dopamine is important in the early stages of addiction. But the final common pathway in addiction is the glutamate neurons projecting back down from the frontal cortex. Kalavas and Volkoff's research is based on an important new tool that has only recently become available to neuroscience, the technology of brain scans. Brain scans are essentially photographs of the brain in action. Now, what these brain scans say exactly is still controversial, but Kalavas and Volkov have found abnormal activity in the brain scans of addicts in two important areas of the cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. These areas are critical for emotional attachment and decision-making. Kalavas and Volkov believe that the abnormal activity here is the basis of the overwhelming importance the brain gives to drugs and the uncontrollable urge it feels to seek them. In addiction, the normal top-down control of the cortex over the midbrain simply fails. The addict's prior commitment to quit, their memory of what happened the last time they drank or used drugs, the love they feel for their family, the knowledge of the punishment they know awaits them if they relapse, when the cortex fails, these things are invisible to the addict.
Kalavas and Volkov call this brain state hypofrontality. What was once a healthy, functional decision-making frontal cortex is reduced to a shadow of its former self. Overactivity in some areas of the brain, and other areas, desolation. This is what lies behind the denial, the personality changes, the breathtakingly impaired decision-making in combination with the tragic loss of insight that characterize end-stage addiction. Addiction begins as a disorder of genes and pleasure, but it ends as a disorder of choice. Hypofrontality gives the addicted brain a powerful tool to protect the connection of the drug to survival, and that tool is called craving. Craving is a difficult concept. We all use the word craving. When people say they crave chocolate, what they mean is they really want chocolate a lot. It's important to understand that's not what the addict means when they say they crave. Craving is an intense, emotional, obsessional experience. The addict wants to think about other things. Their brain is constantly bringing them back to the drug. They are up in the middle of the night. They can't sleep. Their pulse is at 120. They're thinking over and over again, just one more time. That's craving. And make no mistake, that is genuine suffering.
And I think it's the presence of craving that defeats that choice argument. You remember the choice argument. Addiction's not a disease because the addict can quit anytime he wants. Go ahead, put alcohol in front of the alcoholic, and when he reaches for it, you point a gun at his head, and he will choose not to drink. And that's true. With a gun to his head, the addict can, in that moment, choose not to drink. But even though the addict isn't drinking or using, he's still craving. He doesn't have the choice not to crave. Once that connection of the drug to survival has been carved into the brain, you don't actually have to have drug use anymore for the disease process of addiction to be active.
I'm going to make a comment real quick while this is going on that Dr. McCauley is a user of the word addict. I'm going to get into that in a little bit of that title and why that can be problematic and why it isn't problematic sometimes. Anyway, it is sometimes. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Hopefully you're not turned off by that term. Some people embrace the term very, very heavily, and some people not as much. So go ahead and kind of keep going there on that. But just wanted to point that out because he says it a lot.
The choice argument fails because it measures addiction by the addict's behavior. In doing so, it misses the most important feature of addiction to the addict, the craving.
Yeah,
the other thing the choice argument doesn't quite get is that if you put alcohol in front of an alcoholic and a gun to his head, he doesn't think, oh, I better not drink or I'll get shot in the head. No, what he thinks sounds more like this. I wonder if he'll really shoot me. I wonder if he's even got bullets in that gun. Maybe his finger will slip off the trigger. I wonder if I can get that alcohol into my brain before the bullet comes crashing through my skull. That's craving. And that experience is as miserable as it is involuntary.
I like that he's unshaven when he's the guy drinking and not when he's the guy with the gun. Anyway, so pleasureunwoven.com is the website there for learning, or kevinmccauley.com. I'm gonna put that up there because as I can use some of his free materials, then I thought I should mention him. I don't think that came through to anybody, hopefully. Anyway, a YouTube ad just came on because I forgot to close the window all the way. So anyway, so I appreciate that availability of free materials. And like I said, the maybe overuse of the word addict, we'll get into that in a little bit as well. But it's interesting as it talks about the relationship between dopamine in the front of the brain and then the survival system, the limbic system, basically feeding those different chemicals back and forth. So the brain believes at a neurochemical level that the addiction is the proper thing, the thing that is good for survival. Okay. So when we have that going on and we have that completed addiction circuit, it becomes very easy for our choices to become impaired and for us to basically it becomes very, very difficult to make choices. It's a disease of choice is one way to look at that. So that is a very interesting thing to see. Now, what do we do about that? Does that mean it's impossible to make any choices to be sober? No, that's not what it means. It means that it means that there's the deck is stacked against us, and we have to work very hard to be able to be successful with that and to be successful in breaking that cycle. So just like I mentioned before, there is no like the magic bullet of just hanging around with other people. But this is why you see so many different addiction programs that become very, very busy. They add a lot of things into life. The AA, for example, has a lot of meetings that you're encouraged to attend, as well as materials to read, as well as day-to-day practices. Treatment programs that you go to, some of which are overwhelmingly, you come in and you're just there all the time. If it's residential, you're just there all the time doing all kinds of different treatments. If it's an intensive outpatient, same thing. And if it's an outpatient treatment, there's a lot of therapeutic exercises and things that you are supposed to be doing in order to be successful with that as well. So those are a couple of different things that are very important to know about the modern thing of treatment. We still have a lot of hanging on legality, and there is some debate about that, and some debate over how much legal enforcement helps or hurts and stems the tide of either overdose or helps people to stop using drugs or abusing drugs. Well, and I think we can see that there is a lack of effect there when it's all about punishment. Let's see. Dylan Schlender is joining us. There we go.
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Schlender.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I coming in okay?
Yes, you are. I can hear you nice and clear.
Oh, fantastic. I want you to finish the point you were on, because then there is something I want to talk to you about vis-a-vis the whole origins of the opioid epidemic.
Oh, yeah, sure thing.
Yeah.
Sure thing. I was just, the point that I was just on was that law enforcement all by itself, and I have met many, many cops, and when cops, in my experience, when cops are saying, hey, enforcement isn't working by itself, that it's not, because they're taking it seriously. And so they're now even embracing programs that help to do what they call either prison diversion or jail diversion programs, like drug court and, different things that actually are designed to, they still have a force aspect to them, but they're designed to push people more towards rehabilitation, particularly if they determine that the only reason they're in the criminal justice system is because of addiction. So in some cases, people are given an opportunity to reduce or even dismiss or expunge their charges earlier, if they do treatment. So there's still a force aspect.
Bad idea.
Yeah, it's a pretty good idea.
There's always going to be force when the state's involved. I'm not
exactly.
going to go. Yeah, so that's unavoidable. What's interesting? In Connecticut, the state I'm from, they introduced Narcan for the police officers. I'm not a scientist or a doctor or anything. I'm just some guy. But my understanding is what Narcan is, you inject it or give it to someone in the process of an overdose, and it increases the chances of saving their lives. And the first 2 times it was used in Connecticut were both in my hometown. So it is an issue that hits everywhere. Yeah, I know. Both times, same place. And I think that was in 2015 when they introduced that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a life. I mean, I was going to say it's a lifesaver. Well, I mean, technically, that's why it exists. It's a lifesaver, literally.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing. No, we don't want these people to die. We want them to get help and everything. So if I'm just going to hijack it, Dwight.
No, go for it. That was all.
I was wondering if you have ever heard, because I was listening to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, and he was talking about the opioid epidemic. And he mentioned something that I thought was very interesting, that back in the early 90s, there was something called the triplicate program, which is doctors to prescribe class 2 substances like we're talking about. They had a state-issued prescription pad that would give 3 versions of the prescription. They would keep one on file, the state would keep one on file, and then obviously the patient would get his. And I was looking I was doing some research into this, and evidently it was a very effective program. If you look at drug deaths in non-triplicate states versus triplicate states, it's appreciably lower. And what kills me, I guess, is that they had been doing this since like the late 80s, early 90s, and it's something that they got rid of, possibly in response to pressure from drug companies. There might be a conspiratorial angle to it. I don't want to get in there. But anyway, so you as a professional in the space, I was just wondering if that was something you had heard of or had any experience with, because it seems like a viable solution, or at least one of the tools that we could be using in our arsenal if states were to go back to a triplicate program.
That's really interesting. I'm not familiar with those. And so tell me again how that would work then, the preventative nature of it, right?
So my understanding is that since the state would have a record of the prescription, right, they would know which doctor is overprescribing, or is like why is this guy always sending out X amount of pills every week? You know, it would put in a system where maybe you could start seeing some patterns and red flags emerge. That was my understanding of it.
Gotcha. And so it was under more eyes were upon it, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now then you even just, again, we were talking about, the state equals force. If the doctors have to interact with the state, they're like, you know what? I don't want to get shut down. Maybe I'm not recommending opioids for the 17th time this week, So then I guess the argument against it would be that chilling effect of like, well, now what if you're not prescribing medicines that they really need, But I'm looking at a graph here. I don't know how I can share. Can I send you a link?
Yeah, send me a link.
Okay, here we go. I'm sending it in the StreamYard.
Okay.
So if you open that up and just scroll down a bit, the graph I feel is very striking. As much as I loved your graph, that was beautiful, But like this one, I think will show a very interesting picture for the audience here.
I have it. I'm just sharing it now. Just going.
Absolutely, and that's from UPenn, the Leonard Davis Institute of Health Economics, an article published by Abby Alpert. I don't know if she's related to Herb Alpert. Maybe. That would be cool.
That would be.
Yeah. And so basically this is a pretty good overview of that triplicate program. And if you scroll down, you'll see the chart here.
Let's see. There we go. This one?
Yeah. So look at that.
A little bit bigger for people.
Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, of course, but I mean, this doesn't seem like a bad place to start, right? That's one of the things everyone's always clamoring, do something. By my eyes, this looks like something that could work.
It's real interesting. And one of the things and this is just me initially reacting to it. So my thought would be, if you, especially one of the things that is a strength about it is it starts out with the medical community. And then it also places some accountability on them for what they're doing, prescriber wise. We talked a little earlier about people sort of getting slammed for coming forward and saying, I have a problem that was facilitated by my prescription history. And it's like, well, we're going to view you as the dirty, rotten scoundrel now. But anyway, so it kind of starts with the medical community. I think if we implemented it in a modern setting, we also would have the option to perhaps, downplay the law enforcement piece. We wouldn't have to necessarily turn someone in, but we could identify them for the need of saying, hey, you need to be evaluated, over here, or else, the consequence is you're not going to be able to purchase the medication. And I guess once again, that's a form of force, but it's also we don't want you to kill yourself with this, and identifying a problem.
Oh yeah,
I can see it. I can see it being helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess since you're in the space, I mean, is this something you would want to do if you had to write a prescription? Would you want to have to send a copy to the state? I mean, I could think of tons of good reasons why I wouldn't want to loop the state in on what I'm prescribing my patients.
Right. And that's kind of an issue too, then, isn't it? Because that opens the door for certain kinds of discrimination, I guess, against the people who are being prescribed. Maybe also people don't always feel good about being on a list. But at the same time, also, I could see where if there's that accountability, it seems like one of the larger goals of this is to make the doctor think about what they're doing.
Yeah, it definitely is to raise the level of intention, I would say. I mean, because you'll notice, even though non-triplicate went up significantly more, triplicate still went up. I mean, so it's still a problem, It's just like, but could this, if properly implemented, save more lives?
Huh.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, let's do it in 50 states.
There you go. You're not endorsing it necessarily, just saying it's the way, the only way, and the magic bullet that will help.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. It will fix the whole thing if we do it right now. But I mean, I don't know. So that's why I was excited to come on the show and share this with you.
Absolutely.
You just don't hear a lot of like actionable solutions. I mean, they are actionable, I should say, like we talk about, have a sense of community, we got to build hobbies and stuff like that. But, that's all internal. If you gotta have to want it. This is an external thing that could help. And I don't think you have too much of that outside of the aforementioned, police presence, like you were talking about, short of.
That's the thing. Yeah. One of the important differences that, this might be is any time to get into it, which is the advent of harm reduction as a strategy, which is harm reduction is essentially the idea behind it is that there's a real focus on patient autonomy. So if someone comes in and they're like, hey, if someone comes in and says, hey, I want to stop drinking, I want to stop using drugs, treatment programs are really, really used to that and have been set up for that for a long, long time. Whereas if somebody comes in and they say, hey, I would like to, I have a problem with my drinking. I have a problem with drug use, but I don't want to stop. Traditionally, it's a little harder. There's a shame, perspective that might keep someone from coming in and saying that at all. And also there's an anticipatory feeling, maybe even more so than is legitimately valid. There's that fear that the professional, even the therapist, is going to say, nope, you're in denial and I don't have anything to do to help you. Now, I won't say that it's not valid because that happened, I'm sure, and happens still. At the same time, it's like, a lot of people hopefully see, and the thing about a harm reduction is it's more of a therapy friendly model, because as a therapist, we're not really there to tell someone what to do exactly. Obviously. So anyway, but so I was thinking about that because some of the actionable programs that I've seen do come from that mentality. So like a clean needle program, for example, or a safe space to, if you're going to use heroin, to use it in a place where there might be Narcan available, or there's people that, would be there to observe and help and things like that, or different things like that to say, and as a matter of fact, even, some might consider it harm reduction to even have Suboxone or methadone available for people, so different things like that, where there's different programs. And interestingly enough, people do have a reaction to those, where they're saying, do
we know what the success rate is on those kind of programs? I mean, because if we're saying we want to reduce the harm, come here to do your drugs, the drugs are still harm, right?
Right.
So I get that it's harm reduction. You don't want them using. If you're going to shoot up heroin, you might as well use a clean needle. But what's the success rate on those kind of things? Do we actually see appreciable benefits of like, hey, this guy used 3 needles, but now he got a job,
Yeah.
How do we measure success? Is it just the fact that they're still alive, So,
well, I mean, that is one measure, right? That is one measure. You see some of these safe areas in these clean needle programs, people don't die, right? I mean, that's a big one. However, I mean, you're right. It is hard to measure. One of the interesting things, though, is that when they do interview people who are in these programs, one of the biggest advantages I think of is the honesty that people have in these programs. But they do find that most people, once they're engaged with treatment, and it's not meant to be like a sneak around option, but what it is when people are engaged with professionals in treatment, they are more likely to cease, desist, lessen, and most individuals that they interviewed see themselves as someone who will stop using at some point, right? They're not against talking about that. But they don't like to be treated like one size fits all is kind of the thing. So, I mean, and I don't, there is some research to indicate that people who go into a harm reduction program do tend to use less. And like you said, either would they get a job or something like that. So, but yeah, first of all, the first point is saying like, less harm starts out with survival. And then it kind of goes from there to the goal would be, and also all of these programs, I think people think that the programs are encouraging the drug use, but one of the things is there's always availability of more and more counseling, and there's always education in these programs as well. I shouldn't say always, because I can't really speak for all the programs, but they were all the ones that I've been officially aware of, and the ones that people look at and say, oh, that's just some liberal bullshit or something. My experience has been that they are also very interested in helping people get healthy and clean as well. It's just helping them.
So Dwight, you're a smart guy. If you're designing the program from the top down, I cut you a check. It has the infinity sign on it. I say, whatever it takes,
nice.
Go out there and do it. Like, what does your program look like, you think?
I like it. That's a tough question, I think, really.
That's why you invited me on the show.
Exactly. Yeah. This is why the provocative things are coming on. And that gets into a lot of different things. For me, I like individualization. So for me, a big thing a program would have, you have some programs that absolutely like embrace like the 12 steps, and that's built into their program, right? I don't care for that because I feel like that's not professional treatment. However, I also don't care for the people that are, I don't necessarily care for the mentality that 100% shuts that off, because so many people find a lot of good out of that. So I think the program has to have a certain flexibility for people where they find that. So to me, the support groups and things are something that you can support in treatment. But as far as the treatment goes, that's where you get into what I am a big fan of, like trauma reduction, like because I find that, this is research and it's been borne out by my experience too, is that when we focus on the substance, right, it's not as effective as when we focus on the underlying reasons why someone uses. And a lot of times, it associates and correlates with trauma. And that does seem to be something that when people are more traumatized, and I will say this, there's definitely a higher occurrence of trauma in the lives of those who end up having greater risk of addiction. Just like there is also a higher incidence in people who have a mental illness that is not treated.
Yeah, well-adjusted people don't go, well, I'm going to try heroin today. Let's do it.
Right. Yeah, so kind of stabilizing some of those issues. For example, I've worked with a lot of young people whose parents are like, I don't know about ADHD meds. I'm not sure if I want them to be on it. To me, the only question there is like, do I need it to function or not? It's not, is it, I don't, because sometimes people are hesitant because they say, I don't want my kid to be a drug dependent with a prescription drug. And in reality, you're actually statistically more likely as someone with ADHD to use illicit drugs if you're not appropriately medicated by your doctor.
Well, now that I did not know. That is interesting.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
Yeah. And so, if you don't want your kid to have problems with drugs, getting them proper medication is actually a risk factor that you reduce rather than add. And people don't know that, I think, sometimes. So
I think that pull of thinking like, oh, well, if you get them on this stuff early, the dependency is what people were worried about, but we're dependent on lots of things as humans. We need sunlight, we need food, we need some level of exercise, so maybe every once in a while you need a little medication to move it in the right direction.
And, we never really attack. I mean, most of us would never attack somebody for using insulin because their body doesn't produce it. Right.
Oh, no, not at all. Well, I think PETA did for a little bit, right? Because they had some dog stuff.
No, that might be.
We won't get into that. That's fine.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemp Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemp Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.